What are your night shift horror stories? Worked at a liquor store for a few years. One of the homeless guys, probably late 50s, that stood outside would ask for money, and 9 times out of 10 if they said no, he'd flash them his old wrinkly crusty package. Had to chase him off every night so people didn't have to suffer that sight. Annoyingly, people who saw me chasing him off or threatening to call the cops often gave me dirty looks, like as if I hated homeless people or treat them like trash, when in actuality I was saving them from that which you cannot unsee. Worked a parking garage at the airport. Cleaning the top deck and noticed about 100 ravens all over a truck with a tarp over the bed. Took my flashlight expecting something awful. Noticed as I got closer the smell and the ravens taking turns going in a hole they had torn open and popping out covered in gunk. Some guy left a broke down beater with a couple animal carcasses in the back to rot. No heads. Checked the logs and the damn truck had been there since November, and it was April, so everything was just thawing and breaking down. Call my boss, who calls maintenance, to get a crew out there. They had airport police come over and do an investigation to make sure there was no human remains. Some trophy hunter flew in, bought a cheap truck, caught what he wanted and left the rest for us to deal with. Didn't even bother to register or update the vehicle title, so the guy who sold it got a knock on his door from the police. I used to work night shift as a care aide in an old folks' home. It was already creepy. The home was an old hospital that was converted. Some asshole kept walking around the courtyard after dark dressed as the Grim Reaper, knocking on doors. It was actually really scary. He ran off and the facility got a security guard for a few weeks. Was an orderly in a hospital. 2 of us were sitting in the basement office adjacent to the morgue. A guy passed our office, looking at us a little shifty, came back again and asked if we had access to the morgue. We said, yes, thinking he was doing a pickup for a funeral home, but that seemed strange given it was around 12 to 12:30 a.m. Nope. He wanted to pay us to let him in, and leave him alone with the bodies for an hour. We escorted him up to security. Apparently he had tried it in the past, as security knew him. Was running the register at 24-hour supermarket. Stock person comes running into produce carrying mop handle screaming, "You motherfucker!" Out of sight he keeps yelling, "Fucker!" and smacking handle at something, for like 5 minutes. I am ringing up customers, and freaking out because he was losing his mind, but I am not interested in getting involved in a murder, so I ignore it. Later I find out he was chasing a rat. Many years ago I briefly had a job that started at 3:30 a.m. The job itself was very boring, but the commute was wild. The world is at its weirdest in the very early morning. Road hazards haven't been called in yet, so one day I pulled off the freeway and discovered that the off-ramp was completely flooded, deep enough that I have no idea how my car didn't stall. But the most interesting discovery was that if law enforcement has to raid a home, they do it around 3 or 4 in the morning because that's the best chance of everyone being peacefully asleep. One day I was nearly to work when I noticed something off ahead of me. I slowed down and came up to a massive police blockade, squad cars everywhere and absolutely crawling with heavily armed officers, but all in absolute silence. They silently waved me down a side street. Just a creepy, unsettling experience. Did hospital security for about 2 months. It was small hospital out in the sticks, so we were responsible for removing patients who had passed from their rooms and transferring into the morgue freezer. We had just brought a deceased into the morgue, and right before we were about to transfer them to the freezer their cell phone rang. Granted, pretty tame compared to some stories, but at the time it gave us a decent fright. I worked in a residential treatment center for teen girls. One girl with some severe trauma, rape, abuse, came sleepwalking into the room screaming to please untie her while clawing at her wrists. She was begging me to help her because he's torturing me. I sat her down and pulled her bracelets and watch off. She went completely limp, then got up and went back to bed. It freaked me out seeing the raw emotion of her trauma, since she was always smiling and relatively calm during the day. Another time I was doing my nightly checks and a guy suddenly walked out from behind the door coming at me. I screamed and threw my flashlight at him. It was a smiley-face balloon. Leaving one night from work, I was followed by a log truck, and it kept going faster and faster until I was at 100 miles per hour. I pulled off as the truck blew past my car, rocking it. Thing was, there was twisty turns ahead. Couldn't find the truck. Update. No, he wasn't experiencing brake failure. This was on an uphill, which the route is slow and progressively uphill. I'm not on the Grapevine or 4th of July pass. It was just hauling ass. They were running bobtail. Usually if a truck loses brakes, the driver would probably engage engine brakes and downshift. Work in the winter for me is plowing and snow removal. It was late and I had been out for over 24 hours at this point. Pulled over into a small cul-de-sac with the nearest house being over 100 yards away so I could let the truck stay on so I could stay warm. 6 will mac things loud. As I'm nodding off, there was a very loud bang and it felt like someone then pulled on my driver's side door handle. Luckily I always lock my truck doors. I immediately threw on every strobe/rear/headlight and started looking around, and I saw absolutely nothing. It scared the shit out of me. Needless to say, I never sleep anywhere other than lit parking lots now. Worked as an evening manager at a major Hilton property. Got a complaint from a bunch of guests about the noise coming from one of the rooms. Turns out, a drunken man was beating the shit out of his wife and had the door barricaded so we couldn't get in. I called the cops, and they had to get into the room using the balcony from the next room over. I'm still traumatized by what I saw when they finally arrested him and got the wife out of the room. She was covered in blood. It was horrifying. Was closing supervisor at a grocery store and someone managed to shit between the bathroom and the exit doors at 8:59. We close at 9 o'clock. You'd think, oh, there's literal shit on the floor, surely people will walk around it. No, instead they continue to plow through it, so now there's shit on multiple grocery carts. The exit is scattered with feces. There's shit on people's shoes undoubtedly. And there's shit in the parking lot. Luckily for me, my less squeamish supervisor working with me that closing night volunteered to mop up the exit and bathroom, which to our surprise had also been shit on. For the record, human shit makes me immediately gag and vomit when I get a whiff of it, so I ended up puking in the trash next to the shit exit. Worked at a distress center almost 10 years ago. Was on the 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift. Got about 2 phone calls each hour of the shift from the same guy saying that he's tied up in a room, his balls are tied up with leather straps, and his wife is getting banged by 5 giant black guys in the other room. Asked him each time if he's in distress and he says no every time. Kept telling him if he's not in distress then he shouldn't be calling and let him go. I just can't believe he was up from 12 to 6 a.m. to make those calls. Overnight at the supermarket. Man stole the live lobsters and ran out of the store with them in his sweatpants. Like all in his pants. Lobsters falling out of his pockets, out of the cuffs of his pants, etc. Night manager running after him yelling. It was quite a sight. Also, one morning the newspaper delivery guy came to drop off the newspapers at 4 a.m. and some rando guy that seemed to be on drugs that I had just cashed out jumped in the newspaper guy's car and took off. Night manager chased him as he sped off. I was working the Christmas Eve night shift in my local emergency department. The clock struck 4 a.m. on Christmas morning, and the emergency buzzer sounded. A 74-year-old male patient had gone into a sudden cardiac arrest. The buzzer wasn't working properly, so we couldn't locate where exactly in the department it was coming from. Once we finally figured it out, we got in there and I took over chest compressions. A team of anesthetists, nurses, doctors, and 20 minutes later, we managed to get him back for just long enough for his family to come and say goodbye to him. What a shitty Christmas.